back, everybody, to Chapter 4 of the California Laws and Regulations Study Guide. Today we'll be talking about pest control work requirements, get into some more details about the specifics for pest control and what you need exactly to begin work and to make sure that you are doing everything to uphold these laws and regulations. Firstly, just like almost everything, there is an age requirement for handling pesticides. So users of pesticides in commercial production of agricultural commodities must be at least 18 years or older. So if you can vote, you can use pesticides. Employers cannot direct or allow field workers younger than 18 to enter a restricted entry interval area. Anyone under 18 is not permitted to work, mix, load, or apply pesticides when the labeling or regulations require the use of the following: air-supplied respiratory protection, a closed system, full-body chemical-resistant clothing. So anyone who is working in commercial production of agricultural commodities, they have to be 18 years or older, so field workers, pesticide applicators, etc. Obviously, the employer cannot direct someone under 18 to go into a treated field. I would hope that if they did direct anyone over 18, they would have the necessary PPE and other equipment, which we talked about in Chapter 2, I believe. No, wait, that's coming up. Anyways. And yeah, no one is allowed to mix, load, or apply if the label requires those three items. So obviously, like air-supplied respiratory protection, closed system, full-body chemical-resistant clothing, those are going to be used for some pretty toxic chemicals, as you can imagine. You know, air-supplied respiratory protection is going to be used for something which has a lot of respiratory toxicity or hazard. So trying to prevent that could be dust, so on. A closed system is going to be used for something that requires, careful mixing, where the person doesn't even shouldn't be touching it, or should try to avoid touching it as much as they can. So that might be high dermal toxicity, something that absorbs through the skin pretty easily. And lastly, a full body chemical resistant clothing. Ideally, you would have this when you're using any pesticides, regardless of toxicity, just to make sure that, you're keeping yourself safe, trying to lower and minimize your amount of chemical exposure. But for those extremely resistant clothes, the extremely resistant clothing is oftentimes used for the more hazardous chemicals. All right, so what are the pesticide applicators' responsibilities for meeting various regulations and requirements before, during, and after applying pesticides? So, applicators are responsible for meeting the following standards of care. They must use pest control equipment that works properly, so you can't have some, backpack or something that's leaking everywhere and contaminating the ground and getting shit on stuff, and want to make sure that it works properly. Must perform all pest control safely and effectively, so assessing weather conditions, making sure that things are safe for you to be applying pesticides, not spraying when there's 40-mile-an-hour gusts, and making sure that if there's a body of water or something like that, you're not spraying directly into it. You're using suitable methods and equipment to ensure proper application of pesticides. So making sure that you're using the pesticide equipment that properly works with pesticide being sprayed. So, using a application device that's meant to spread granules, or dust for dust, so on and so forth. Perform all pest control under suitable weather conditions, like I was saying, not spraying when there's high amounts of drift, potential with wind, and when there's potential for leaching or runoff with high amounts of rain, if the ground is at field capacity and it can't take up any more water, that's going to increase your likelihood of runoff. Okay. Exercise reasonable precautions to avoid contaminating the environment. So recognizing sensitive areas or areas of concern, and making sure that you are doing everything in your power to avoid damaging that area and the environment. Have a copy of the registered pesticide labeling. Obviously, you want to have a copy of that on hand, in your pocket. If you're spraying whatever it is, make sure that you have that with you so that you're able to read through it and make sure that things being applied are being applied according to the label, because if not, then you're violating the law. Measure or weigh concentrated pesticides accurately, so knowing, okay, I've measured this out, this is exactly what it is, not just guesstimating and pouring it out and thinking, okay, this should make a 3% solution without knowing exactly what's in it, because you could be going over the label, you could damage the environment, and so on. Maintain a uniform mixture in application and service rigs, so making sure that the mixture is consistent throughout so that it's not spraying too much over here and not enough over there, or it's not mixing properly, or you want to make sure that you're intentionally aware and laying out these mixtures appropriately. Clean pest control equipment thoroughly, so when you're done with using the pest control equipment, making sure that you are properly disposing of any waste created by it, and that it's not going to contaminate anyone who's touching it if it hasn't been cleaned. And then avoid contamination of water by equipping each piece of application equipment. So there are various laws and regulations behind tanks and other pieces of equipment. So like larger tank equipment that holds a lot of water have to have a control shutoff valve. So if it were to start leaking, or if you're filling something up and it starts overflowing, it recognizes that and immediately shuts off, so it's not just leaking all over the place. Because that's the last thing you want, is a big, massive amount of chemical spilling out. So making sure that each piece of equipment is equipped with the necessary precautionary pieces of machinery and equipment that will prevent any contamination of the water. Next we have cleaning application equipment. So information on cleaning application equipment should be done according to the pesticide labeling instructions. Labeling may provide instructions on specific cleaning products or procedures to use. So it may say use this or use that. Maybe this is the only thing that can clean it, or maybe you should 100% avoid cleaning it with something because it may create a chemical reaction. So reading the labeling will tell you all of that. And failing to follow the directions could be considered use in conflict with the label and unintentionally causing illegal residue or phytotoxic effects. If labeling does not specify specific cleaning methods, then thorough washing of the product intended for cleaning application equipment is usually adequate. Wash water from application is considered hazardous waste unless applied to the application site. So there's a thing called triple rinsing, which is repeatedly pouring water into the mixing application equipment when it has been emptied, and taking the waste or rinsates from that and either applying it directly to the pesticide site or just making sure that it's staying at the application site because you had just sprayed there. And the chemical is present. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're not going over the label limit when you're doing stuff like that. All the normal laws and regulations still apply. You can also dispose of it at a high enough class disposal site, but that's expensive and costly, and it's much easier to just apply it to the site at hand. Next, we have notice of application requirements. So before pest control can perform pest control activities, they must obtain consent from the operator of the property and provide a notice of application, letting them know that they are beginning their application. The content and responsibilities of the operator depend on whether the pesticide use is for the production of an agricultural commodity or not. So they need to know if it's for production of agriculture or if it's not, which will determine what information you put on there. So the notice of application requirements. Each person performing pest control for the commercial or research production of an agricultural commodity shall assure that the operator receives a notice of application prior to conducting activities. This must include date, start times, and estimated end times of the scheduled application. So you gotta let them know I'm beginning then, I'm ending now, whatever it is, Want to make sure that they're kept in the loop so they know to avoid that area or to be aware of it. They need to know the location and description of the field to be treated. Makes sense. The pesticide product names, United States Environmental Protection Agency registration numbers and active ingredients, so what's in these chemical mixtures, what's being applied. Spray adjuvant product names and California registration numbers if applicable. So what adjuvants are being put in there, does California have or what is the California registration number for it, if it has one. The applicable restricted entry interval. So how long they should be staying away from the site. How long they should be maintaining distance, when they can re-enter, or if they do need to enter, what are the additional laws and regulations behind entering. Next, we have if the pesticide product labeling requires the posting of warning signs around the treated field, oral notification, or both. So the label will say post signs directly at the site and notify everyone in the surrounding area, or it will say neither of those, it depends. Lastly, any other precautions printed on the pesticide product labeling or in applicable laws and regulations related to the protection of employees or other persons during or after an application. So any other additional laws and regulations behind the notice of application. All right, notice requirements continued. Notice of completed applications. This is after you've completed the application and after the notice of application. So a pest control business applying pesticides for the production of an agricultural commodity must give a notice to the operator of the property treated after the application is complete. A notice of completed application must be given within 24 hours after completing the pesticide application. So you don't want to leave them in the dark. You want to make sure that they know that pesticide application has been completed at least 24 hours, at most 24 hours, as soon as possible. Information which must be included are the location of the property, including site identification number and treated acreage, pesticide or spray adjuvant names, U.S. EPA or California registration numbers, dates and times that the application was started and completed, applicable restricted entry And pre-harvest intervals, unless the operator has a copy of the PCA recommendation. A pest control business must maintain a written record of notifications made for 2 years, including this info. So they have to have this written record of notification at least 2 years. That's important that you know that. I'm sure that's going to be a test question, along with how long after a notice of complete application should be given. So what's in that written record of notification? It's the name of the operator of the property that was treated, the location of the property, including site identification number, date and time the completion notice was given, and method that was used for notification and name of the person notified. All of that information is good to know. It will most likely be a test question. What are some pest control business requirements? So what must the pest control business do? They must do the equipment identification, labeling each service rig with the name of the business, or the licensed pest control operator, similar wording, and the pest control business license number. They must have a copy of the written pest control recommendation or work order and the restricted material permit covering each agricultural use application of a pesticide. And if a pesticide accident occurs, they must report it to the county agricultural commissioner immediately. This report must include the location of the accident, the pesticide involved, the estimated amount of pesticide released, and an accident can be determined by forced landing of a pest control aircraft, mishap involving pesticide application equipment and transport vehicles, or types of emergency or accidental pesticide release. So who has to maintain pesticide use records? Pest control businesses, obviously, they need to know how much pesticide is being used, and the government wants to know that information as well so that they can record that. And other users who are applying pesticides for any agricultural use, any pesticide listed in Title 3 CCR, Section 6400, or the Restricted Materials section, users who are applying industrial post-harvest commodity treatments, and pesticide listed in 3 CCR 6800 or the groundwater protection list, which has all the chemicals that can damage groundwater and are used for outdoor institution or industrial pest control. What should pesticide use records include? The date of application, the name of the operator of the property, the location of the property, the crop, commodity, or site treated, total acreage or units treated at a site, and the name of the pesticide, including U.S. EPA or California registration number, and the amount of that chemical used. When the application is made for production of agricultural commodities, the record must also include the location of the property treated, county, section, township, range, base, meridian, hour the treatment was completed, different from notice of completed application and application-specific information, which requires the start and stop time, the operator identification number issued to the property operator, the site identification number issued to the property operator, the total planted acreage or units at site, and the name of the person from the business who made and supervised the pesticide application. Obviously, the date is important to know. You want to know what day it occurred on, the name of the operator so they know who is applying these pesticides and their location so they know where, the site being treated so they know that the chemical being used on it is fair for usage for that, the amount of the area treated, that's very good to know, and the name of the pesticide and the amount. So all these pieces of information, extremely important, are recommend going over these quite a few times just so you have a general understanding of why they're recorded and why they should be known. I guarantee maybe one of these will be a test question. Next, we have pesticide use reports. So, pesticide use reports for production of agriculture, which is different from non-agricultural use reports. Pesticide use report must be submitted to the CAC following an application for production agriculture. It must include information required for agricultural commodity, pesticide use records, and address of the pest control business that made the application. They must be submitted to the County Agricultural Commissioner within 7 days of completion. I guarantee that's a test question. You need to know that. Pesticide use reports are submitted within 7 days of completion. Operators of the property must submit pesticide use reports by the 10th day of the following month, unless the pesticide use was reported to the CAC by the pest control business. Pesticide use report for non-production agriculture, or just non-ag. Pesticide use report must be submitted monthly on the 10th day of the month that follows the month of work to the CAC and the County of Work. This monthly summary use report must include the name and address of person, business, or organization applying the pesticide, month and year of the pesticide use, crop, commodity, or site treated, pesticide name, USCA reg numbers, and undiluted amount, number of applications made with each pesticide and total number made during the month, and the total acres or units treated with each pesticide. Important to know these pieces of information, just so you know what goes on them. Definitely need to know that they're submitted within 7 days of completion and the differences between the two. Alright, so next we're going to talk about the Healthy School Acts. So the Healthy School Acts are a California act, which is a right-to-know law that provides parents and staff with information about pesticide use taking place at public schools and child care homes. So part of the Healthy School Acts are pesticide use reports for school and daycare sites. So regardless of the Healthy School Acts is a voluntary piece of legislation for schools if they want to participate in it or not. But regardless, pest control businesses must provide pesticide applications, pesticide application use reports to school sites, and their monthly use report to the CAC. So if they're spraying within a certain distance of a school or daycare, they have to notify the CAC as to what they've been spraying, when they sprayed it, and all the usual stuff for a pest control business. And then at least annually, a detailed report of pesticide use at school sites must be submitted to the DPR, and this information is kept separate from what is submitted to the CAC. So every month, the CAC has to get a use report for anything sprayed near school and daycare, and then annually, the pest control business must send an entire list of the pesticide use reports for school and daycare sites, applications nearby. And then the Healthy School Acts, like I said, voluntary California act for schools to participate in, a need-to-know basis for pesticide use. School and daycares with the HSA, as it's abbreviated, along with any pest control business they hire, must adhere to the laws and regulations of the act. HSA prohibits the use of any pesticide with a conditional, interim, or canceled registration, which are used under an experimental use permit or with uses that are otherwise being phased out. So they can't use, chemicals that haven't been approved, which are experimental, ones which are no longer being used, or ones with registrations that are up in the air. California's Healthy School Act is a right-to-know law. It's copied twice there for some reason. Requirements for pest control businesses hired by a school with HSA. They must provide an application notification and posting application warning signs around the school. They must not use prohibited pesticides, which we talked about above. They must keep pesticide use records. They must submit an annual HSA use report to the DPR. And they must complete a DPR approved IPM training course that focuses on the safe use of pesticides at schools and child care facilities at least once per license renewal period. Definitely know that anyone participating in the HSA has to submit an annual report. That'll come up, and then previous things we talked about, just a good thing to know about. Know that it's a California act. They may try to trick you on the test and saying that it's federal, but it is a California act, and all of the laws and regulations apply. Continuing on to agricultural pesticide use around schools and daycares. For agricultural pesticide applications within a quarter mile of public K through 12 schools and daycares, California requires annual notification to the school site of expected pesticide applications and restrictions on times and distances certain application methods more prone to drift can be used. So what goes into the annual notification? Operators of the property within a quarter mile of a school site applying pesticides for the production of an agricultural commodity must provide annual notification of pesticide expected to be used to the CAC by April 30th. This must include the operator of the property's contact information, additional information specified in the regulation, and a list of all pesticides expected to be used within a quarter mile of the school during July through June. New pesticides may be added by providing notification to the school site and the CAC at least 48 hours prior to application. Application restrictions. Restrictions are made Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. within the specified distance of a school site. Distance restriction can be 1/4 mile or 25 feet, with some being prohibited altogether. So, yep, you can't really spray at all during pretty much most of the year and most of the days of the week to protect the children from possible drift and exposure, especially when you're considering the methods of application. So, this may require some additional forward planning for when you can spray, what you can spray with what you spray that. You may need to work weekends, so on and so forth, find ways around it to make sure that you are being as safe as possible, because violating any of this could land you in a lot of trouble. Exceptions to application restrictions. No distance restrictions if pesticides are applied in an enclosed space. Restrictions do not apply if there is no scheduled school, and additional agreements can be made between the school and the operator to choose effective and safer application methods. So during winter break, I imagine if there's nothing planned and there's no kids planned to be on campus, then you will most likely be able to spray. So keeping in contact with the school is definitely essential to knowing when would be a good time to spray and get things done. All right, next we're going to go over some of the application methods and their various distance restrictions from the previously mentioned slide. So first, air blast sprayer with dust, quarter mile, fumigant prohibited, granule doesn't occur, and all other pesticides, quarter mile. So as you can see, each one of these application equipment types has its own corresponding distance restriction. So yeah, go ahead and pause it here, just take a look at everything and try to get a good idea of what it's saying. Thus, obviously, it makes sense to have a further minimum distance. They're very prone to drift. You got to be very cautious with dust to make sure that you are not drifting it with particle drift in the surrounding area. It can be very easy with wind to carry it far and wide, especially because it's finer particles of pesticide, and being that it is dust, it could be still concentrated in the air with the particles, which could result in some serious damage. Fumigants, obviously, if you're using a ground rig sprayer, hand pump sprayer, if you're spraying and injecting with fumigants, it's similar to dust, so it's a very fine vapor. It's not dry, it's a wet vapor. So that has similar effects to dust. It can drift very easily if not done correctly. So another reason why it has that quarter-mile regulation. And then granules. Granules are pretty stable. They're pretty consistent. They're pretty much just like crystal chunks of pesticides, which are a lot easier to control, and they get sprayed and they don't go far at all. They stay in the area that they're sprayed into and they release over time. So obviously the only restriction would be aircraft, because when you put something in an air like that, it can fly far enough away given the speed of the aircraft and potentially wind plus the speed of the aircraft blowing it around. And then all other pesticides that will rely on the application equipment being used. So just knowing these general distance restrictions is good to understanding everything, maybe knowing the reasons why, and just thinking about like what I have explained here, the drift potential and the damage that it can cause and how far it can go in theory. Just good things to know. All right, another important part of pesticide application is pollinator protection. So as we've all heard, pollinators are dying all across the United States, and these laws are put in place to ensure that pollinators are not being decimated at the same rate that they have been, especially in areas where they are more prone to death or utilizing chemicals which are more prone to damage them, or in areas where they're more fundamental, like citrus crop areas. We'll talk a little bit about that. But protection of bees, if you are planning to spray a pesticide which is labeled toxic to bees, the following special procedures are required. So you must notify beekeepers. If planning an application to a blossoming plant with a pesticide that is toxic to bees, you must first notify the CAC prior to application. The CAC will determine if there are any beekeepers with apiaries within 1 mile of the application site. Once this occurs, the beekeeper can request a notice, which means they must be notified at least 48 hours before the application with the following information: time and place the application is to be made, crop and acreage to be treated, method of application, name and dosage rate of the pesticide to be applied, procedure for the beekeeper to contact the person performing pest control. Extremely important. I cannot stress enough how much you should know those numbers. They definitely will come up on the test. So any beekeeper within 1 mile of the application site must be notified at least 48 hours before the application. So obviously that does depend on if the beekeepers are registered with the agricultural commissioner, but for the sake of this, we're just going to assume that they all are. So 1 mile of the application site, you must notify them within 48 hours before the application has occurred. On top of that, we have notification regions. Butte, Glenn, and Tehama counties are established as a region in which notification of apiary owners is required. And then citrus and bee protection areas in Fresno, Kern, and Tulare counties. Areas within 1 mile or more have been designated as citrus and bee protection areas. Special bee protection requirements apply in these counties. I recommend knowing those counties. That also will definitely come up on the test. They take this pollinator protection very seriously. So knowing that Fresno, Kern, and Tulare are citrus bee protection areas, those counties are very reliant on citrus production. So they do have a lot of bees to pollinate all those citrus trees. So those have a very serious consideration of pollinator protection. And then Butte, Glen, and Tehama, they have a required notification of apiary owners. In general, it is extremely important to notify beekeepers if you are spraying, especially if it's toxic to bees. These additional laws and regulations in those counties ensure that it is backed by law. All right, next part of this chapter talks about delivery and storage of pesticides, another extremely important section. Delivery and transportation of pesticides. When pesticides are being delivered, they must be given directly to the operator of the property or their agent, somebody that works for them or someone that they know and trust that can be responsible for the chemical, and the qualified person of a pest control business or their employee. So similar thing. So it's either got to be the person in charge of everything, the direct operator, or their designated agent or employee who is trusted and can handle this chemical. If this is not possible, the pesticide must be left in a locked enclosure posted with warning signs. Pesticides must never be transported in the same vehicle compartment as people, food, animals, or animal feed. So definitely do not take the pesticide box with all the chemical in it and put it in your cab right next to you on the front seat. If that spills in your cab, it's now become a hazardous waste site, and if it is dangerous to humans, it may make your whole cab completely unable to be occupied. Pesticide containers must be secured to the vehicle during transportation in a way that will prevent spills into or off of the vehicle. So strapping them in, maybe if you're transporting a lot, you can put them on, palletize them, and wrap plastic around them, secure them. Just making sure that they are secure in place. They're not in the bed of your truck sliding back and forth as you're going on these windy roads, or you hit a bump and now it flies out of the back of your bed and all over the highway, and then it's just a big mess. And you got to notify the county agriculture commissioner, and then it just doesn't look good. So all you got to do is just strap it in. Just make sure it's secure, make sure it's not in the seat with you or anywhere near food items. Makes pretty much common sense. Pesticide security and storage. To prevent unauthorized people from contacting pesticides, personal control must be exercised through one of the following. A designated person maintains control over the pesticide containers and application equipment. The pesticide containers and application equipment is stored in a locked enclosure. Pesticides must be stored in accordance to the label on all of the pesticides located in the storage. Do not store PPE with pesticides given the risk of contamination. If a storage facility has held pesticides labeled with the signal words danger or warning, warning signs must be posted on or around the storage area. These signs must be readable from 25 feet away in a suitable language in addition to English. I recommend knowing all of these, especially the 25 feet away. That will be on the test. I guarantee it. So know that it must be read from 25 feet away. When storing or transporting pesticides, the containers must carry the pesticide registrant's label. So just a quick summary of that. I mean, it's all common sense. If you're going to store pesticides, make sure they're being stored correctly. You don't want to put them in a greenhouse and then have them explode or become inert or cause a lot of issues, might volatilize, it might do some crazy stuff. So make sure that you're reading the label and knowing how it should be stored. And then on top of that, make sure that you are locking it so that people who are not equipped to handle these are not handling them. And then obviously you want to make sure that on top of it being locked, you're posting it with the correct warning signs as well, so that nobody's touching them and knows what's inside the storage facility. Exemptions. Containers that hold or have held pesticides packaged, labeled, and used for home use are in the possession of homeowners on their property. So general use pesticides are an exemption. to these rules. So you don't need to, the Roundup that you buy at the Lowe's or wherever you get it doesn't necessarily need to be in a locked facility posted with danger signs and stuff. You should definitely be careful with where you're storing them because it is still a chemical. It still can cause damage, but it has lower levels of restrictions placed on it because it is meant for homeowners and general population. Next, we have pesticide container requirements. Service container labeling requirements. A service container is any container other than the original labeled pesticide container that is used to hold, store, or transport concentrated or diluted pesticides. So that could be, a designated jug or a container that you have in which you place the pesticides after it comes in that original container. It could be a secured application piece of equipment like a herbicide tank that you mix things in, that you place everything in there and get the mix ready. Pretty much anything that is registered that can hold the chemical legally is a service container outside of, what it originally comes in. All service containers must be labeled with the name and address of the person or firm responsible for the container, the identity of the pesticide in the container, signal word danger, warning, or caution from the label of the original container. Illegal containers. It is illegal to place or store pesticides in any type of container that is commonly used for food, drink, or household products. That's a no-brainer. You don't want to be putting the dangerous chemical inside a Coke bottle. Don't be stupid. That's a really easy one to avoid, and that could cause some serious issues if you're not adhering to that. If you're putting it in a Pringles can or some dumb shit, somebody opens it up and now they got a nice big waft of illegal or dangerous chemical in their nose, and now they're at the ER and possibly even damaged permanently. So definitely know that. The reuse of empty pesticide containers. So once pesticides have been fully used from their container, it would be against the label to refill them with other substances, so it's better to triple rinse and dispose of them. So, you got a container of glyphosate, don't put triclopyr in there, and that'll cause confusion, and it'll, you don't know how they'll react, or maybe if you do, they may not react the way you want them to, or it may confuse somebody and they may use over the label limit. So these are kind of common sense, service containers being labeled those items, something that should be known. But yeah, other than that, it's kind of just common sense, Keep it in a container that can handle and should handle these pesticides, and don't reuse the original containers and put other stuff inside them. Make sure that they're cleaned thoroughly and disposed of properly. All right, so the disposal of pesticides and their containers. Pesticide bag disposal requirements. Pesticide properly emptied according to DPR guidelines will not be considered hazardous waste. These can be disposed of at Class 3 landfills or by burning. Another less desirable disposal option, burning them. If you do decide to burn them and they are properly cleaned, definitely make sure they are properly cleaned, then you would need to burn them with an agricultural burn permit that has been issued to the operator of the property by the local air pollution control district. So that requires you to get in contact with the air board, and they're going to have to determine whether or not you can burn, and at what point you can burn them depends on weather conditions and if they want to approve the burn or not. Burn permits allow for burning at field location to dispose of agricultural waste such as printing and cardboard boxes. Container rinsing requirements. Empty containers that held less than 28 gallons of a liquid pesticide must be triple rinsed and drained unless they are going to be returned to the pesticide registrant. or they held an undiluted ready-to-use pesticide. Check with the county agricultural commissioner about local requirements before disposing of any pesticide or rinsed or unrinsed empty pesticide container. It may be required to have the properly triple rinse pesticide containers inspected by the CAC before disposal at approved disposal or recycling sites. A hazardous waste facility permit may be needed to store old pesticide materials or unrinsed pesticide containers awaiting disposal. Certain unrinsed emptied containers may also be returned to the pesticide registrant with the pesticide registrant's prior approval. Prior to returning the pesticide containers to the registrant, all lids or closures must be tightly sealed. Yeah. It's a little less common sense. Definitely go over, every pesticide is going to have different disposal requirements, and make sure that you're checking in with those requirements and properly cleaning and rinsing out these containers, putting the rinsates in your application tank. We talked a little bit about it earlier. Applying it directly to the application site is going to be your best option because you've already applied chemical there. That is the place that you should dispose of the rinsates. You could put it in your application equipment and spray it, so long as you're not going over the label limit. Other than that, if you're not able to rinse it, then you're going to have to consider it hazardous waste, and it's going to have to go through an extra level of regulations and steps for it to be properly disposed of. Exemptions: containers that hold or have held pesticides registered as a spray adjuvant, and outer shipping containers that have not become contaminated with pesticides. All right, so this is the last slide. It is just a quick overview of rinsing procedures for pesticide containers. So method one, and probably the most common and well-known method, is the triple rinse and drain. So that size of the container will determine how much container volume you fill with water. So make sure that you meet that requirement. Fill it with water, drain it into the mixed tank, allow it to drain an additional 30 seconds, and then repeat it 2 more times to provide at least 3 rinses or until the rinsate is clear. It's important that the rinse solution be drained into the mixed tank and applied to the crop or site being treated. Pretty much what I had explained. This is known as the triple rinse method. Probably will be on the test. It's a good thing to know because that's how you should be disposing of it. Method 2, we have continuous or jet rinse. Invert the empty container over a nozzle that is located in the opening of a spray tank or nurse rig, capable of rinsing all inner surfaces. Activate the rinse nozzles, allowing the rinse solution to drain into the tank. Continue rinsing until the rinse solution appears clear or a minimum of 1/2 of the container volume. Use 15 pounds pressure, blah, blah, blah. Just use the triple rinse method unless you got all this fancy equipment. You want to go through these extra steps. It's the simplest, it's the easiest. Everybody's got their own way of doing things, but as long as you're adhering to proper rinsing procedures, then you're not breaking any laws. So I hope you guys got something out of this chapter. Kind of a doozy. The next ones are too, but yeah, it's a long one. I'm not sure if I have much else to add. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and post them. I may respond. I have my test coming up soon, so I'm going to try to get these other chapters out before the test. But yeah, have a good day. Enjoy the studying.